On the day she was crowned, the princess understood that someone in that room did not want her alive. The realization did not come like thunder. It arrived softly, almost politely, the way poison slides into wine without disturbing its surface. The cathedral bells were still echoing over the city. The weight of the crown was still unfamiliar against her scalp, and everyone around her was smiling with the practiced devotion of people who had waited a lifetime for this exact moment. Yet, as she lifted her gaze from the marble floor and looked into the sea of faces below the dais, one pair of eyes did not celebrate. They calculated, they measured, and they vanished behind a bow before she could be certain she had seen them at all. You might think a coronation is loud, glorious, overwhelming. It is, but it is also unbearably quiet inside the person who wears the crown. The silence inside her was so sharp it almost hurt. Her father had stood in this very place not long ago. His voice strong, his presence unquestioned. Then, in the space of a single night, he was gone. No illness anyone could name. No warning that felt real until it was too late. A king dead in his bed, and a daughter forced to become a queen before she had learned how to grieve. They told her it was fate. They told her it was the will of God. They told her many things, all wrapped in velvet words and lowered voices. But no one could tell her why the royal physician had disappeared before dawn, or why her father's last cup of wine had been cleared away and the goblet melted down before sunrise. No one could explain why the corridors outside the king's chambers had smelled faintly of bitter almonds that night, or why the guards assigned to him were quietly reassigned to distant provinces within days of his death. She noticed these things because she had always noticed too much. It was a flaw her father used to tease her about when she was a girl. When she hid behind curtains and listened to council meetings she was not supposed to hear. He had called her his little shadow. He had said the throne would be safer if she ever wore it. She wished, now, that he were here to explain why it felt like the throne itself was breathing beneath her, alive and hostile, as if it knew she did not yet belong. The palace had changed overnight, or perhaps it had always been this way, and she had only just learned how to see it. Familiar halls felt narrower, as if walls had leaned in to listen. Servants spoke less freely, their eyes darting toward doorways before they answered even the simplest questions. Old allies of her father bowed deeper than necessary, their loyalty suddenly theatrical, while others lingered at the edges of rooms, studying her as though she were a puzzle they intended to solve or break. And then there was the engagement. It was announced before her father's body had fully cooled, framed as a necessary act of stability, a gesture meant to reassure a restless court and an even more restless kingdom. She stood beside the man they had chosen for her hand resting lightly on his arm, and felt the subtle tension beneath his skin. He was composed, elegant, devastatingly handsome in a way that did not ask for approval. His smile was easy, his eyes were not. He was a prince in name, a duke in practice, a man whose lands bordered hers like a blade pressed against skin. He had been her father's ally when it suited him, and his rival when it did not. He was rumored to be ruthless, brilliant, incapable of love, except as a strategy. And now he was hers, or she was his. The difference mattered more than anyone seemed willing to admit. When he leaned close enough for only her to hear, his voice brushed her ear like a secret. He congratulated her on surviving her coronation, not on becoming queen. Surviving, the word lodged in her chest and stayed there, heavy and sharp. She looked at him then, truly looked, and wondered whether he was warning her or reminding her of something he already knew. That night, alone in her chambers, she did not sleep. The bed felt too large, the sheets too cold, without the familiar weight of grief pressing down on her. She replayed the day in fragments, the crown, the eyes, the voice at her ear. Somewhere beyond her walls, the palace breathed and shifted, alive with footsteps that never fully faded. She rose before dawn and crossed to the window, watching the city below stir into life, unaware that its fate had changed hands while it slept. She thought of her father then, not as a king but as a man. She remembered the way his hands smelled faintly of ink and metal, the way he hummed when he was thinking, the way his laughter filled rooms that now felt hollow. She remembered the last thing he had said to her, spoken casually, almost carelessly, as though it meant nothing at all. Trust no one completely, not even those who love you, especially not those who say they do. At the time, she had smiled and rolled her eyes. Now, standing alone in the half-light of a new reign, she understood that it had been a warning. The first attempt on her life came quietly. It was nothing dramatic, No blade in the dark, no poison slipped into her food. It was a loose stone on a staircase she had climbed since childhood, timed perfectly between torchlight and shadow. She would have fallen if she had not paused to listen to a sound she could not place, a whisper of movement behind a tapestry. Her foot hovered, then withdrew. The stone shifted under her heel anyway, skittering down the steps like a confession. They found nothing when she ordered a search. No one saw anyone. No one heard anything. The tapestry hung innocent and still. But later, when she returned alone, she noticed that the fabric smelled faintly of unfamiliar perfume, sharp and floral, nothing like the palace oils. She pressed her fingers into the weave and felt her pulse quicken. Someone had been close enough to touch her. Someone had chosen not to, or had failed. From that moment on, she began to play a different game. She smiled more. She spoke less. She listened with a patience that surprised even her. She let people underestimate her because it was easier than convincing them she was dangerous. She allowed the engagement to proceed, standing beside her betrothed at feasts and councils, learning the rhythm of his presence, the way his attention sharpened when lies entered a room. He fascinated her against her will. He was attentive without being warm, protective without being possessive, as though he understood precisely how much distance to maintain. Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she would not notice, his expression unreadable. Other times she felt certain he was deliberately turning away, denying himself something he did not intend to want. They spoke often, always in public. Their conversations a careful dance of shared history and neutral courtesy. It was only late one evening, when a storm trapped them in a gallery far from prying ears, that the truth slipped. He asked her, directly, whether she believed her father had died of natural causes. The question should have shocked her. It did not. What startled her was the way he asked it, without accusation, without fear, as though he were discussing the weather. She studied his face, the way lightning carved it into silver and shadow, and wondered whether answering him honestly was the most dangerous thing she could do. She told him she did not know. She told him she was learning how many people benefited from her ignorance. He nodded, as though this confirmed something he had long suspected. When she asked him what he believed, he hesitated for the first time since she had known him. The pause was brief, but it changed everything. He believed the king had been murdered, not by a single hand, but by a consensus, by silence, by people who had waited for the right moment to stop protecting him. That night, when they parted, the air between them felt altered, charged with something unspoken. She lay awake again, but this time it was not only fear that kept her restless, it was the dangerous comfort of being understood. As weeks passed, truths emerged slowly, like bones rising through thawing ground. A ledger hidden behind a false wall revealed payments to unknown accounts. A servant confessed, through tears and trembling hands, that she had been ordered to leave the king's wine unattended. A letter surfaced, unsigned, warning of an alliance that would end a reign quietly, efficiently, without bloodshed. Every revelation narrowed the circle. Every answer raised new questions. The court shifted around her, alliances forming and dissolving with alarming speed. Those who had once spoken boldly now chose their words with care. Those who had been silent began to test her, offering half-confessions, gauging her reactions. Through it all, her betrothed remained at her side, his loyalty apparent yet never fully explained. She began to rely on him in ways she did not admit even to herself. When danger brushed too close, he was there. When doubt threatened to paralyze her, his presence steadied something inside her. And when desire crept in, unwanted and undeniable, she fought it with the same discipline she brought to every other threat, because she knew love could be a weapon. She had seen it used before. One night, as the palace slept uneasily, she followed a suspicion into a wing long abandoned, its corridors dusty and cold. She found him there, not surprised, as though he had expected her. Between them lay a truth neither of them wanted to speak. He confessed that his own rise depended on the king's death, not because he had caused it, but because he had chosen not to stop it when he could have. He had believed the kingdom would be stronger without her father. He had not anticipated her. The confession shattered something fragile between them, even as it bound them closer. She should have turned away. She should have condemned him. Instead, she saw in his admission the same conflict that lived in her, the terrible understanding that power is rarely clean, and survival often demands compromise. When they stood too close, breath mingling, she felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing in. He did not touch her. She did not ask him to. The restraint was almost unbearable. By the time whispers reached her that another attempt was being planned, she was ready, or as ready as anyone could be when enemies wore familiar faces. She set a trap woven of truth and lies, revealing just enough to draw the guilty forward while keeping her own hands clean. On the night it sprung, the palace seemed to hold its breath. What she uncovered did not bring peace. It brought clarity edged with horror. Her father had been betrayed by those he trusted most, not out of hatred, but out of fear. They had believed they were saving the kingdom. They had been wrong. As dawn broke, she stood alone once more, crown heavy, heart heavier still. Her betrothed waited nearby, his future tied irrevocably to hers, his guilt a quiet shadow between them. She did not know whether she would ever forgive him. She did not know whether she wanted to. The kingdom slept on, unaware of how close it had come to disaster, unaware of how precarious its balance remained. She looked out over it, a queen forged in uncertainty, carrying not only a crown but a legacy of enemies who had not all revealed themselves. And as she turned back toward the palace, toward the man who was both her greatest risk and her strongest ally, a single question lingered, unanswerable and urgent. One she could not escape and perhaps did not want to. If you were in her place, with love and power so dangerously entwined, would you choose justice, survival, or something far more dangerous to admit? The night after the truth began to fracture, the palace did not sleep, neither did she. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes after revelation. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of knowing too much while everyone else continues pretending. The queen felt it settle into her bones as she walked the corridors long past midnight, the hem of her nightgown whispering against stone floors that had absorbed centuries of secrets. Every torch she passed seemed to flicker differently, as if even the fire understood that something had shifted. She had learned who helped end her father's life. She had learned how quietly it had been done, but she had not learned everything. And what frightened her most was not what she knew, but what still remained hidden, patiently waiting. People imagine that once you uncover a betrayal, clarity follows, justice, relief. They are wrong. What follows is fragmentation. Every memory rearranges itself. Every conversation from the past acquires a second voice beneath the first. She found herself questioning moments she had once cherished, wondering whether kindness had been real or simply well performed. She stopped outside the old council chamber, a room unused since before her birth. The door was ajar. Light spilled through the crack. Inside, voices murmured. She should have turned away. Queens survive by choosing which doors not to open. But curiosity had always been her quiet rebellion, and now it was her sharpest weapon. She stepped closer, heart steady in a way that surprised her. The voices belonged to men who had sworn loyalty to her father, men who now swore the same to her. They spoke not of guilt, but of contingency, of borders, of succession, of how fragile a young queen could be if pressed from enough sides at once. They were not planning her death, not yet. They were planning her obedience. She listened until her hands curled into fists, until anger warmed her chest enough to burn away fear. When she left, she did so without sound, carrying their words with her like a map of where the next dangers would rise. By morning, she had made a decision that would alter the rhythm of her reign. She would stop reacting. She would begin orchestrating. At breakfast, she laughed. It startled everyone, even herself. The sound echoed lightly across the long table, delicate porcelain, trembling as if surprised by joy in a room accustomed to restraint. She complimented the food. She asked about harvests. She spoke of festivals she intended to revive in the capital. The court relaxed, mistaking warmth for weakness, relief for control. Only one person did not soften. Her betrothed watched her closely, his gaze sharp with something dangerously close to admiration. When their eyes met, there was a silent understanding between them. He knew she was changing, and he knew change in a ruler was never accidental. Later, in the privacy of a solo overlooking the eastern gardens, he spoke first. He told her that foreign envoys had begun arriving unannounced, that letters were moving through unofficial channels, that someone was testing how easily she could be isolated. He did not offer advice, he offered information. It was his way of asking permission to remain useful. She thanked him, nothing more. The distance between them grew heavier than hostility. It was the distance of two people who shared too much truth to be innocent with each other again. At night, she sometimes imagined what it would be like to reach for him, to let desire override caution. The fantasy always ended the same way, with blood on silk and regret written into history. She did not reach. Instead, she summoned someone else. Her mother's youngest sister had lived quietly on the coast for years, dismissed by the court as inconsequential. She arrived wrapped in salt air and sharp intelligence, her eyes missing nothing. The queen saw immediately what others had overlooked. This woman had survived by being underestimated. She had watched generations of power rise and rot. Together, they began weaving alliances that did not announce themselves. Favors granted quietly, promises left deliberately vague. The kind of power that does not need witnesses. Still, danger pressed closer. A lady-in-waiting collapsed during supper, foaming at the mouth before anyone could react. The poison was meant for the queen. There was no doubt this time. Panic rippled through the hall, raw and uncontrolled. The queen did not scream. She did not rise from her seat. She watched the girl die and memorized every face in the room. Grief would come later. Strategy came first. That night, as rain battered the palace roofs, she confronted her betrothed again. Not with accusation. With vulnerability. She told him she was tired. She told him she was afraid. She let her voice fracture just enough to sound real. He listened, jaw tight, restraint barely holding. When she asked him whether he would protect her if it cost him everything, he answered without hesitation. Yes. The simplicity of the word unsettled her more than any lie could have. Protection, she had learned, was another form of possession. The next weeks blurred into a careful escalation. Arrests disguised as reassignment. Trials delayed indefinitely. Evidence misplaced, then rediscovered when it suited her. The court began to whisper her name differently, not with pity, with caution. Yet the mystery of her father's death refused to close neatly. One name remained absent from every confession. One presence lingered in every shadowed corridor of the past. The royal confessor, a man who had heard the king's last doubts. A man who had vanished the morning after the death, officially sent on pilgrimage, unofficially erased. She found him in a monastery far from the capital, older than she remembered, thinner, his eyes clouded with something between regret and relief. He did not resist when she confronted him. He had been waiting. What he told her did not simplify anything. Her father had known he was going to die. Not when, but why. He had discovered a coalition forming, one that included foreign powers and trusted advisors alike. He had believed exposing it would ignite civil war, so he had chosen silence. He had chosen to die quietly and let his daughter inherit a kingdom, bruised but intact. He had chosen her. The knowledge hollowed her. Her father had sacrificed himself for stability, trusting she would be strong enough to finish what he could not. Love and manipulation intertwined so tightly, she could no longer tell where one ended. On the journey back, she cried for the first time since the coronation. Not in front of witnesses, not in front of mirrors. She cried alone, grief finally allowed to breathe. When she returned, she was no longer the same queen. She stood before the court and announced reforms that would shift power away from those who had grown comfortable abusing it. She did not explain herself. She did not justify. Resistance rose immediately, sharp and vocal. She welcomed it. Open enemies were easier to survive than hidden ones. Her betrothed opposed her publicly for the first time. It was measured, strategic, necessary to preserve his influence. Their eyes met across the chamber, and something almost like grief passed between them. This was the price of their unspoken bond. They could never stand fully on the same side. That night, he came to her chambers unannounced. They spoke honestly then, brutally, about ambition, about guilt, about how close they had come to becoming something dangerous and tender and impossible. When he touched her cheek, it was not with hunger, but with farewell. They did not sleep together. They understood that if they did, the choice would become irreversible. By dawn, the palace was quieter than it had ever been. Or perhaps she was simply louder now, her presence filling spaces that once threatened to swallow her whole. She stood at the window again, watching light spill over the city, aware that enemies still breathed, still plotted, still waited. The crown no longer felt foreign. It felt heavy, earned, alive. She did not know whether her father would approve of who she was becoming. She did not know whether love would ever be safe for her. She did not know how many more betrayals waited behind polite smiles. But she knew this: she would not die quietly. And as footsteps approached behind her, familiar and unreadable, she did not turn. Some answers, she had learned, reveal themselves only when you are willing to stand still in uncertainty and let the danger speak first. The footsteps stopped just behind her. She felt them rather than heard them, a subtle displacement of air, a familiar presence that had learned her rhythms as well as she had learned his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city below continued to wake, unaware that its fate was once again balancing on a silence too fragile to trust. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it, not careful, quiet, as if the words themselves carried weight enough to bruise. He told her that someone had tried to reach him in secret during the night, not with threats, with an offer. The offer was simple, almost elegant in its cruelty. Support her reforms publicly, fracture the remaining opposition, secure the kingdom's future in exchange for something that would never be written down, never spoken aloud in council, never officially acknowledged. When the time came, when unrest became inevitable, when a single figure would need to absorb the blame for decisions made in shadows, that figure would be her, not her reign. She listened without interrupting, her fingers tightening on the stone ledge until cold bit into her skin. The cruelty of it was not that they wanted her gone, it was that they wanted her useful until the very end. A queen shaped to take the fall so that the structure of power could remain untouched. She asked him one question, not whether he had accepted, not whether he intended to protect her. She asked him who had made the offer. The name landed between them like something already dead. It was a woman, one she had trusted, one who had wept openly at her father's funeral, one whose loyalty had never been questioned because it had always appeared too emotional to be calculated. Betrayal, she was learning, rarely arrived wearing the face you expected. She dismissed him without another word. That day, the court gathered under the illusion of routine. Petitions were heard, minor disputes settled. The machinery of monarchy continued its steady turn, grinding quietly over the lives beneath it. And through it all, she watched, not for obvious threats, but for hesitation, for glances exchanged a fraction too long, for relief where there should have been fear. By evening, she had decided something that would shape everything that followed. She would let the plot continue, not because she lacked courage to stop it, but because she needed to see how far it reached. She needed to know how many hands were willing to push her toward the edge, while smiling as they did it. The woman who had betrayed her was invited to dine privately. The invitation was warm, personal, impossible to refuse without drawing attention. They spoke of grief, of duty, of the loneliness of women who survive powerful men. The traitor's eyes filled with tears at all the right moments. Her performance was flawless, almost. What gave her away was relief. Relief that the queen still trusted her. Relief that the danger had not yet noticed her shape. The queen returned that relief with kindness. She leaned in, she confided, she allowed herself to appear exhausted, overwhelmed, isolated. She let herself be seen as breakable. By the end of the night, the woman believed the game was already won. Elsewhere in the palace, the betrothed moved carefully, quietly neutralizing threats that did not yet realize they had been named. He acted without orders, without recognition. If he was to become the villain of this story one day, he would at least ensure she survived long enough to choose it. Their relationship shifted again, becoming something colder and more intimate all at once. They no longer spoke of trust, they spoke of outcomes. Days passed, The pressure increased. Whispers reached the city. Grain shipments delayed. Minor riots flared and were extinguished just quickly enough to feel accidental. The narrative was being prepared. A queen too young, too ambitious, too reckless with tradition. She attended a public procession knowing someone in the crowd carried a blade meant to frighten rather than kill. She did not flinch when it flashed. The people saw courage. Her enemies saw opportunity. Both were exactly what she needed. That night, she stood alone in her chambers, holding her father's signet ring, the last object he had ever pressed into her palm. She wondered whether he had known how much she would have to become like those he had tried to protect her from. She wondered whether love was ever meant to survive proximity to power. When the knock came at her door, she did not turn immediately. She knew who it was. He entered without ceremony, tension carved into every line of his body. He told her the final stage had been set, that the woman had moved too quickly, revealing allies she could not afford to lose. That if the queen acted now, decisively, publicly, she could shatter the entire coalition in one motion. There would be consequences. There always were. She faced him then, really faced him. And for the first time since her coronation, she allowed herself to speak without strategy. She told him she was afraid of what this was turning her into. She told him she was afraid that surviving might cost her the parts of herself that still felt human. She asked him, quietly, whether he thought power inevitably hollowed those who held it. He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. He said power did not hollow people. It revealed them, and revelation, once begun, could not be undone. They stood too close again. The space between them pulsed with everything they would never allow themselves to choose. This time, he kissed her forehead, a gesture of restraint so intimate it almost undid them both. By morning, the trap would close. By nightfall, the court would be forever changed. She sent the summons just after dawn. The woman arrived confident, already rehearsing her performance of concern and loyalty. The council gathered, the doors closed. Evidence was presented with surgical precision, not all at once, piece by piece, enough to confuse, enough to terrify. When the truth became undeniable, the woman did not beg. She accused. She claimed she had acted for the kingdom, for stability, for the legacy of a king who had been too weak to finish what he started. The queen listened without interruption. Then she spoke. She did not rage. She did not threaten. She spoke of choice, of fear disguised as patriotism, of how easily people convinced themselves they were heroes while sharpening knives behind velvet curtains. The sentence was exile, permanent, public. A mercy that felt like cruelty to those who understood what exile truly meant. As the woman was led away, her eyes met the queen's, and in them was something unexpected. Not hatred, recognition. The court dispersed in stunned silence. That night, the palace felt different again. Not safer, sharper, like a blade, freshly uncovered. She stood alone on the balcony once more, the city lights trembling below. Somewhere behind her, the man she could never fully trust and could never entirely release waited, his future bound to hers by decisions neither of them could undo. She knew the kingdom would remember this day as the moment their queen became dangerous. What it would never know was how many enemies still watched from the dark, or how close the greatest threat now stood, not with a weapon in hand, but with loyalty that might one day demand a price she was not yet ready to pay. And as the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint echo of bells from a distant tower, she wondered whether the crown had finally settled, or whether it was only tightening, preparing for the moment it would demand more than survival. The bells did not belong to the palace. She realized it slowly, the way one becomes aware of a wrong note only after it has already altered the melody. The sound drifted across the city, lower, slower, resonating from a quarter that had no reason to be awake at that hour. Not celebratory, not alarmed, measured, funereal. She turned finally and found him watching her with an expression she had never seen before. Not calculation, not restraint, something closer to dread. Those bells, he said, did not ring without permission. Someone had given it. The message reached them before the meaning fully settled. A rider arrived, mud-stained and breathless, carrying news that could not wait for dawn. A noble house had closed its gates, not in defiance, in preparation. Their banners had been taken down, replaced by colors older than the kingdom itself. Symbols that had not flown since the wars that nearly erased the crown from history. It was not rebellion, it was remembrance. The queen felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. She had dismantled a conspiracy, exposed traitors, proven herself capable of decisive cruelty wrapped in mercy. She had believed the threat was singular, linear, rooted in the court she could see. She had been wrong. This was older, deeper, a fault line beneath the throne itself. By midday, reports multiplied. Other houses followed suit, not openly, not dramatically. Quiet withdrawals, strategic silences, men who failed to appear at council, coin that stopped flowing where it always had, alliances dissolving without explanation. The kingdom was not rising against her, it was stepping back. She convened an emergency council. Faces she had learned to read now presented her with something new. Uncertainty not about her strength, but about her legitimacy. Questions danced around the truth without ever touching it. Was the crown truly hers, or merely inherited through convenience? Was her father's reign as secure as history claimed? Were there promises made generations ago that had never truly died? She dismissed them all. Power, she had learned, was not maintained by consensus. It was maintained by presence. That night, she ordered the archives opened, not the public ones. The sealed wing beneath the palace, where parchment aged in silence and truths were buried, not to be forgotten, but to be controlled. She descended alone, torchlight trembling against stone walls that had not felt warmth in centuries. The air smelled of dust and iron, and something faintly sweet, like decay disguised as preservation. She found it there. A lineage record altered by careful hands. A succession decree amended after a war that official histories reduced to a footnote. Her father's claim had been strong, but not uncontested, and hers rested on silence. On the choice of others to accept what had been decided for them. The realization did not weaken her, it infuriated her. When she emerged, he was waiting. He did not ask what she had found, he did not need to. The look on her face was answer enough. They argued then, not with raised voices, but with the kind of precision reserved for battles that matter. He warned her that confronting this truth openly would fracture the realm, that ancient loyalties were not governed by reason, but by myth. That once questioned, legitimacy never fully recovered. She told him she would not rule by pretending the ground beneath her was solid if it was not. She told him fear built on lies always rotted. He asked her then whether she was prepared to lose him if this path demanded it. The question landed harder than any accusation ever could, because this time it was not a strategic possibility, it was a personal one. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked him something she had never allowed herself to voice before. If he had known, from the beginning, that her crown rested on fracture rather than certainty. If his loyalty had been to her, or to the inevitability of change she represented, his silence was answer enough. Not because he did not care, but because care had never been the deciding factor. In the days that followed, the city grew restless, not violent, watchful. Stories spread faster than proclamations. Old songs resurfaced in taverns, lyrics altered just enough to question rather than accuse. Symbols appeared, carved into wood and stone, subtle enough to deny, deliberate enough to signal belonging. She addressed the people herself, not from the throne, from the steps. She spoke of inheritance not as divine right, but as responsibility, of a crown not as proof of purity, but as a promise to endure scrutiny. She did not deny the past, she reframed it. A kingdom forged through compromise was still a kingdom worth protecting. The reaction was not immediate. Some cheered, some turned away. What mattered was that no one could pretend ignorance anymore. That night, he did not come to her chambers. Instead, a letter arrived. unsealed, written in his hand. He was leaving the capital, temporarily, officially to negotiate with the dissenting houses, unofficially to decide whether his future still aligned with hers. He wrote that if he stayed without certainty, he would become either her shield or her executioner. He refused to be either by accident. She folded the letter slowly. Power, she understood now, did not only demand enemies, it demanded distance, from comfort, from love, from anything that could be used against you simply by existing. As dawn broke, she stood alone again, watching the city hold its breath. Somewhere beyond the walls, old loyalties stirred, testing whether her reign was an interruption or a turning point. She placed the crown on her head herself this time, not because she needed the reminder, but because she wanted to feel its weight before the kingdom decided whether it would carry it with her, or wait to see who else might claim it next. The city answered her speech slowly, the way a body tests whether a wound will heal before deciding how much pain to allow itself to feel. Markets reopened, but conversations stayed hushed. Guards stood straighter, yet their eyes lingered longer on faces in the crowd. The banners of the crown still flew, but now they shared the skyline with symbols that meant different things to different people. Nothing had collapsed, nothing had settled. The tension lived in the pause between breaths. She learned to rule inside that pause. Every morning brought reports that contradicted one another. One province pledged renewed loyalty, while another delayed its taxes without explanation. A noble family sent gifts extravagant enough to be insulting. A distant port closed its docks for repairs that never seemed to end. Each gesture was small. Together, they formed a question no one dared to ask aloud. How long would she last? She felt his absence more than she expected. Not because she missed comfort, she had long stopped expecting that, but because without him, every decision echoed louder. There was no one left who could challenge her privately without fearing reprisal. No one who could look at her and see the woman beneath the crown without confusing it for weakness. Some nights, she imagined him riding through foreign halls, negotiating with people who smiled politely while measuring how useful her fall might be. She wondered whether he spoke of her with admiration or caution. She wondered whether distance was changing him in ways she would not recognize if he returned, or if he would return at all. It was during one of these nights, when sleep refused her and the palace felt too vast to belong to a single heartbeat, that she received the second letter. This one bore no seal, no signature, only a single phrase written in a hand she did not recognize, but whose confidence was unmistakable. Your father did not die to save the kingdom. He died to save you. She read it once, then again. Then she sat very still, listening to the faint sounds of guards changing shifts beyond her door. The words did not accuse, they invited. She burned the letter before dawn. But fire does not erase questions, it sharpens them. She returned to the sealed archives with a different purpose this time, no longer searching for legitimacy, but for motive. What threat had been so precise, so personal, that a king would choose silence over survival? What knowledge had he carried alone, believing his death would bury it forever? The answer came fragmented, hidden in correspondences never meant to be read together. A foreign bloodline, a marriage negotiated in secrecy, a child born during a ceasefire and claimed by another man for the sake of peace. A risk that, if exposed, could have unraveled alliances built on carefully curated ancestry. Her hands trembled as the truth assembled itself. Her father's greatest enemy had not been a rival house or an ambitious council. It had been history. She was not only his heir, she was his proof. If the truth surfaced fully, it would not only challenge her right to rule, it would rewrite the story the kingdom told itself about who it was and why it had survived. For the first time since her coronation, fear gave way to something colder: resolve. When the council gathered later that day, they found a queen who listened less and decided faster. She announced the royal progress through the provinces that had grown most distant, not to intimidate, to be seen. to force the question into the open rather than allowing it to rot in rumor. Several advisors objected. Too dangerous, too visible, too soon. She smiled. Danger, she said, was already deciding without them. That evening, word arrived that a faction loyal to the old symbols planned a gathering. Not violent, ceremonial, a show of unity meant to remind the people that alternatives still existed. She chose to attend, unannounced. The square fell silent when she stepped into it. Cloaked simply, crown absent, presence unmistakable. Faces shifted from defiance to shock to something resembling awe. She did not speak immediately. She waited, allowing discomfort to do what speeches often could not. When she did speak, it was not to claim superiority. It was to claim truth. She did not reveal everything. She revealed enough to make clear that the past they were clinging to was not as pure as legend suggested. Enough to make them understand that the choice was no longer between her and tradition, but between stagnation and survival. Some knelt, some turned away, but none forgot. That night, as she returned to the palace, another message waited. This one, finally, in his hand. He had uncovered something that changed everything. Something that explained the letters, the symbols, the timing of her father's death. Something he could not write, even in code. He was coming back, alone, and he was no longer sure whether he was bringing her an alliance or a warning. She set the letter down carefully, feeling the familiar tightening beneath her ribs, the sensation that always preceded a turning point. Outside, the city breathed, restless and alive, unaware that its story was about to fracture again. She reached for the crown, not to place it on her head, but to feel its cold weight in her hands. Some inherit enemies, some inherit power. She was beginning to understand that she had inherited a truth powerful, enough to destroy both, depending on who spoke it first. He arrived at dawn, not through the gates, but through the side passage reserved for messengers who carried news too volatile for ceremony. She was already awake. Some part of her had known sleep would not come again until she saw his face and measured what had changed. When he entered the chamber, travel-worn and dust-stained, the distance between who he had been and who he was now felt immediately visible. His posture was the same, his restraint intact. But there was a new sharpness behind his eyes, the kind that came from realizing the world was larger and more dangerous than even ambition had prepared you for. They did not embrace. They stood facing one another, the silence between them thick with everything that had happened in absence. It was she who broke it, not with a question, but with an instruction. Tell me what you could not write. He did. What he had uncovered was not a single threat, but a design. Not a plot aimed at her reign, but a slow correction set in motion long before her father ever fell ill. A network of houses across borders, bound not by loyalty to a person, but by allegiance to an idea, that the kingdom had deviated from its intended course generations ago, and that history, left alone, would never correct itself. They did not want chaos. They wanted restoration. Her father's death, he said, had been a compromise, a way to weaken the crown without shattering it, to allow transition without martyrdom, to give the next ruler just enough time to either fall quietly or be shaped into something acceptable. They had not anticipated her resistance, nor had they anticipated that the truth of her lineage, fragmented and buried, would begin to surface on its own. As he spoke, she felt something inside her settle into place, not relief, but alignment. Every strange hesitation, every calculated kindness, every enemy who preferred patience over violence suddenly made sense. They were not waiting for her to fail. They were waiting for her to concede, to accept a version of herself that fit neatly into their design. She asked him the question she had avoided since the first letter arrived, whether he believed the kingdom would survive the truth if it was spoken without restraint. He answered honestly, no, it would fracture. Borders would harden, blood would follow ideology, as it always did, but silence, he added, carried its own cost, one that would not be paid all at once, but slowly. by rulers who would inherit the same lie and be forced to defend it with increasingly brutal certainty. She turned away from him then, crossing to the window as the city began to stir. From above, it looked peaceful, almost innocent. She wondered how many lives had already been shaped by decisions made long before they were born. How many people would never know they were living inside someone else's compromise. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. She would not reveal everything, not yet, but she would no longer protect the lie either. If history wanted correction, it would have to survive exposure. The days that followed moved faster than any she had known. She announced a gathering of the realm, not a council, but a convocation. Representatives from every province, every house, every borderland that had ever claimed grievance or loyalty. The invitation was not optional. Absence would speak louder than protest. Panic spread quietly among those who had counted on shadows. Rumors accelerated. Stories mutated. Some painted her as reckless, others as visionary. A few, dangerously few, began to call her necessary. He remained at her side, advising when asked, silent when not. Their dynamic had shifted again, no longer balanced on desire or distrust, but on shared inevitability. They were two people who knew too much to pretend they could walk away unmarked. On the eve of the convocation, she returned once more to the sealed archives. This time not to search, but to leave something behind. A document, written in her hand, detailing everything she knew and everything she suspected. It was not a confession. It was a safeguard. If she fell, the truth would not fall with her. She sealed it with her father's signet, not to honor him, but to finish what he had begun. That night, the palace was unnaturally still. Even the guards spoke in murmurs, as if the walls themselves were listening. She stood alone in her chambers, unbraiding her hair, removing the crown piece by piece, until she looked almost like the girl she had once been. Almost. There was a knock at the door, not urgent, not formal. 3 measured taps. The signal they had agreed upon in case of danger that required trust rather than force. When she opened the door, it was not him. It was a woman she had not seen since childhood, dressed plainly, eyes sharp with familiarity that did not belong to strangers. She bowed deeply, not in submission, but in recognition. She spoke a single sentence, quietly, as if stating something long overdue rather than new. "Your mother did not die the way they told you." The air seemed to thin, as though the palace itself had drawn a careful breath. In that moment, the queen understood that the story she believed she was controlling had only just revealed its true beginning, and that the enemy she had inherited was not only waiting in the future, but reaching toward her from the past with a patience that had outlived kings.